So presenting for tonight's Florida School Counselor Association webinar is Lilia Neidel, PhD, NCC, NCSC. She's a program specialist for elementary school counseling in St. Lucie County, Florida. She has experience as a professional school counselor in all settings and grade levels, including virtual, alternative education, and traditional school settings. Dr. Neidel recently graduated with her PhD in Counselor Education and Supervision from Florida Atlantic University in August 2022. Her areas of interest and expertise include school counselor advocacy, working with LGBTQIA students, crisis counseling, mental health, and school counseling program development and evaluation. In her free time, Dr. Neidel enjoys playing with her corgi and boxer, going to the beach, reading psychological thrillers, taking day trips to Universal Studios, and trying out new recipes. Dr. Neidel, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm very excited to be able to do this. It's something that I've wanted to do for quite a while now. I think MTSS is such a beast in itself that I thought this would be a great opportunity to share just a lot of information and then, my own experiences and knowledge with MTSS. I want to start just by introducing myself so you guys can get to know me a little bit. So a little bit about me. I'm actually originally from Maryland. I moved here in 2015 because I hate the cold weather and I was sick of shoveling snow. Honestly, that's why. I have 3 stepchildren, and I think it's funny because I wrote 3 stepchildren, 1 husband, as if I was going to have more than that. But I have 2 dogs, a corgi and a boxer, like Holly said, 2 cats, and then my husband has 2 saltwater fish tanks. I don't take any part in them. I actually initially wanted to be a prison warden. So my bachelor's degree is in criminal justice, and I interned at a women's prison and I absolutely loved it. But then I decided that I wanted to go in another direction and work with students before they ended up in the criminal justice system. I actually was a school counselor for 2 years at the St. Lucie Detention Center, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought a lot of that criminal justice background helped me a lot when I was in the school within the detention center. Like Holly said, I literally just graduated with my PhD a few weeks ago, and I included the picture here because I thought it was hysterical because I'm cheesing so hard in it. I was so happy, 1 to be done and 1 for the accomplishment, and 2 for the accomplishment, but more so to just be done. My dream job is actually to be a dolphin trainer, but I always say school counseling is a close second. It's not like it would be impossible to do. It's just, one of those things where I'm like, I need something a little more stable than a dolphin trainer. And then I love true crime podcasts. A lot of what Holly was saying. I love psychological thrillers, the beach, anything related to water, cooking, decorating, all that good stuff. So that's just so you guys have a little bit about me. My experience, like Holly said, I've worked in all levels in all settings. So all that, I was in the detention center. I worked for our district's virtual program, which is powered through Florida Virtual and Edgenuity, but it's our own program, and then through the traditional brick and mortar school setting. I worked 1 year as a district-based MTSS program specialist, and I worked a lot with interventionists, school counselors, school psychologists, all different groups to try and help create a MTSS structure that worked well for the entire district so that it kind of flowed well together. Thank you guys about my doctorate. I just saw the chat. And like Holly said, I'm currently the program specialist for elementary school counseling in St. Lucie County. So there's 17 elementary schools, and there's about 45 school counselors that I oversee. And I really enjoy it. It's something that I really, really wanted to do for a long time. And I'm happy I finally got into that position this year in July. So let's get started. The first thing someone else from Loyola. Go Greyhounds. Anyway, I have to stop looking at the chat because I'm going to get distracted because I want to talk to you guys. I like to talk to people. That's why I'm a school counselor. So what is MTSS? Now, I'm sure all of you know what it is. You're all school counselors, but I love to still give an overview of it just to kind of refresh ourselves and look at the bigger picture of what we're working with. I think a lot of times we just see MTSS and we just think RTI, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, like those are just the things that come to our mind. But I really like to dig into it so we can get a better idea of what it looks like from our lens. I'm not going to read directly from my slides. I call that slide fatigue, where you're not even thinking, you're just kind of reading because your brain is farting. I mean, I will read from time to time, but a lot of this is just so you can have an idea and go back to it when you need it. But I really liked the problem solving approach that I found on the Branching Minds website, which if you go to that site, there's so much useful information for school counselors and MTSS. But basically, what is MTSS? We're using that problem solving approach to figure out what the issue is. How can we figure out how to solve the issue? What kind of plan are we going to create to solve the issue? And then how are we going to figure out whether that plan worked or not? So let's move on. So it's a tiered infrastructure. We're looking at using evidence-based interventions that we're implementing in all schools, all grade levels. And it's all data driven. Everything, and I always tell my own school counselors, everything you do should be driven by data. And that's why MTSS is such a big part of what we do, even if we don't realize that it is. Everything we do is actually related to MTSS in one way or another. And we'll get into that shortly. What are some of the benefits? It's so true that it can really show you where the gaps are in your current practices and how you can close those gaps. And it's from the most common challenges that you don't even think about, because it's just things that we're used to in education. Like, our resources are limited. There's only so much we can do with what we have. And in a perfect MTSS structure, we can't do it. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a perfect education system because it's impossible to do. So we work with what we have. But there's also those times where it's difficult to collaborate or to communicate with others. And then just having that lack of visibility in your program overall. If other people in your organization, in your school district, even in just your school or even your department, don't see why your program is effective and what it's doing to change students, it's going to be really difficult to continue that program and not be pulled into those duties that you shouldn't be, that are inappropriate: lunch duty, bus duty, hall duty, and then other things that aren't just duty related as well. I'm using the word duty too much. It also helps educators to be thoughtful about what resources we're using. So if you take away any verbiage from tonight, it's evidence-based and data. Everything what we do is everything that our school counselors use in our school district has to come from an evidence-based framework. We allow them to pull from programs that they want to use, but there are specific programs they're required to present to students through classroom guidance throughout the year that are evidence-based, that are backed by our reading plan, our state, and they've shown to be effective. And by using this MTSS model, we've determined that they are effective, so we continue to use them. So moving on, what is MTSS? I said a quick overview, but I keep going with it. Like I said earlier, students are put into 3 tiered categories. You always hear tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of what those tiers look like, because I'm sure everybody knows, but I want to just a lot of this look at from a school counseling lens. So when we're looking at it from a school counseling lens, we're looking at it from prevention and intervention strategies. So what can we do to prevent something from happening, and what can we do to intervene? Because unfortunately, a lot of what we do is putting out fires. So how can we put out fires in a way that's still showing that we are effective in our role? We're using our degree. We're using what we learned in our degree to better the lives of our students. We're using the data that we collected from those prevention and intervention strategies to show our admin and the teachers and staff that what we're doing makes a difference. So being able to tie all of that together, even though I think it does come with a lot of hard work and background work, it does make a huge difference in what our programs can look like. So as you know, MTSS was initially just referred to as RTI, or that response to the intervention. We weren't really looking at it as a whole. We were just starting with how are students responding to this intervention in general. Then we kind of took a turn, not a turn, we kind of went backwards a little. We're like, oh, okay, let's wait a second. let's look at how we're getting to those interventions in the first place. What are we problem solving for? What data are we using to implement these interventions in the first place? And it's not just academic interventions, but social, emotional, mental health, behavior, all of that's included. So speaking of included, an MTSS framework for it to be considered effective, useful, done with fidelity, as long as the interventions themselves are also being done with fidelity, it would cover these few dot points that I have listed here. So those early interventions that are for all students that also match grade level standards. So we're looking at the biggest group of that tier 1, but you're also monitoring those students and you're communicating with parents on how the student's progressing. I can't tell you how many times I've had parents call and they're upset, they're frustrated because they feel like they're not getting that communication that they need from a school, and they feel like their student's not doing well. And I remind them, not that it's anything against what you're saying, but some of our counselors don't have huge ratios, and I promise you, they will get back to you. It's not like you're not on their list. I'm sure they're going to get back to you within a day or two. But it's something where they feel like they're not being communicated with. And I try and remind my school counselors, do something as simple as a remind app, or something where it's, your own blog, or this is the best way to contact me, something where they know you're available, you're there to support them. It just might not always be right when they want it. And you might wonder, how exactly does this fall into an MTSS framework? Again, everything we do in school counseling falls into MTSS one way or another. Being able to pull the communication pieces and then align those to those problem solving meetings using the data, all of it ties together in one way or another. So like I said earlier, I'm not going to go through the specifics on the interventions, the 3 tiers, but I do like to just point out what I have in bold here. So that tier 1 is going to be that large group, the 80% or more of students should be gaining what they need just from those tier 1 interventions. We should see a higher likelihood of success for most students with those interventions that are being provided to the entire class, the entire grade level, the entire school. Really varies depending on what the needs are of the school in general. But like I said, 80% is what we usually aim for. For tier 2, you'll see I have bolded no more than 15%. Now, this can get a little tricky because I have a lot. I actually just was in a meeting today where a teacher said, well, 15% in a school of 3,000 is still a lot of students. You're not wrong. And we don't have the manpower to have that many interventionists to serve that number of students. However, how do we work with what we have and make it work with what we need to get done? So in our county specifically, for example, we will use intensive reading courses at the high school and middle school level as our tier 2 intervention for students that aren't able to pass that FSA at the high school level, the 10th grade FSA. That'll be considered a tier 2. Is it exactly a tier 2? No, you can't consider a whole class a tier 2, but if the teacher's pulling small groups within that class, we consider that our tier 2. We don't expect them to be magicians or miracle workers. We work with what we can do and what we have. So this instruction is supposed to take place outside of the class that they're struggling with. If it's an academic intervention, again, they're struggling with reading, they're in an intensive reading class, we're doing that tiered intervention during reading. We tell them it's okay. Make do with what you have. If you can pull them outside of that class, even better. But if you can't, we're not going to scold you for that. And then, of course, tier 3 is no more than 5%. This is going to be that really small group of students that really needs that extremely structured, intense, targeted intervention, even more than the tier 2. And don't forget, all of these are supposed to be happening at the same time. So while they're receiving tier 1 and tier 2, now the student's also receiving tier 3. Sometimes my counselors or interventionists will say, well, now they're in tier 3, so we don't need to do tier 2 or 1. I'm like, nobody, we're doing all 3. Does it seem like it's impossible? Yeah. Does it seem like it's going to be a huge amount of work? Yeah, but we'll figure out some way to do it. We'll look at a schedule and create it together. Okay, so let's look at some myths and truths that a lot of our school counselors get related to MTSS and ESE and all of that good stuff. So these are actually myths and truths that have a lot of our counselors experience in our district. So I figured, why not bring them up for everyone here? So the myth: evaluation is the only way to get my student more help in school. Sometimes our parents get anxious and think, well, I need to just get my child evaluated because that's how I'm going to figure out what's wrong with them. Well, the truth is, when we find what instruction or instructional intervention works best for them, that is more likely to show them what give them a more successful school experience than just an evaluation. And I remind parents that public school requires MTSS and RTI interventions as part of that eligibility process for an ESE evaluation. Not every program, but most of them. And we explain to them that a lot of times students, I don't want to say fizzle out, but the issues that they were having in academically tend to get a lot better when they're put in these interventions. And they're not just academic. Sometimes it's for things like looking at emotional or behavioral disorder, and the student is put into a social skills group in a tier 2, and then they're in individual counseling in a tier 3, and we start to see a lot more progression with that student's behavior. And they think, well, maybe instead of putting them, instead of an IEP for emotional or behavioral disability, we can just look at doing a behavior intervention plan for now. So the next myth we looked at is schools must evaluate if the parents request it. I literally thought this until 2 days ago, because in our district, the way that we do things is if a parent requests an evaluation, we have to abide by that. So we have a new psychological services program specialist on our team that came from another district, and she said, no, that's just how your district does it. That's not the real way. And then I started reading more, and I thought, oh, if I would have just read our whole manual, I would have known that. But a big problem with that is we don't want parents to feel like we're not trying to help meet them halfway and say, well, we'll do this for you, but we need to at least implement interventions as well. So really what we need to do is meet with the parents and hear their concerns, and then we determine those next steps through that problem-solving team meeting. I think a lot of times if we just meet with that student with our group of people that are experts in different areas, we can alleviate some of that anxiety and that confusion with parents and help them understand maybe evaluation is not what we need to do right now. Let's at least try X, Y, and Z first. And if those still don't seem to be showing any success or progression, then we can move to an evaluation. That's actually, I've realized I've done that a lot without realizing I was doing it. So I told her, well, maybe I did know, and I was just pretending I didn't know in the back of my mind. Who knows? So the third myth is MTSS is just used to delay the ESE evaluation, which of course we know is not true. The participation in MTSS cannot delay the referral or the evaluation when there is evidence to suspect a disability. So if a student is really struggling, it's completely unethical for us to say, well, we need to just keep them in the intervention anyway and see if they if they improve at all. We can absolutely start that referral or evaluation process while they're still in the interventions. So I just bring these things up to you because these are a lot of what our school counselors in our county come to deal with, because in St. Lucie County, the school counselors are the PST, the problem solving team coordinators. It's not like that in every county, but in our county specifically, they're either the coordinator or they're one of the leads on the PST team. And your county might call it student support team, SST. I've heard it referred to a bunch of different acronyms throughout the state, but we just refer to them as PSTs. So let's talk about it. This is when I'd love to see your responses in the chat. I want you to just think about, like, you're sitting at your desk, you get a phone call, a family has come to you, their child is struggling, and you can even just say, okay, a child is struggling with their anxiety. What's your usual first response or course of action? If you could put those in the chat, I would love to read some of them out loud to the group. I'd love to hear what different counties, different counselors with different experiences, their first go-to thought is in that process. Don't be shy. I'm not going to move forward until someone puts their answer in the chat, like at least one person, so I don't feel like a loser. So when a family comes to you because their child's struggling, okay. Yep, Dr. Upton, I would do the same thing. I look at their grades, I look at their attendance, I kind of look at their academic history overall, kind of get a good picture of what I'm dealing with, and then kind of move forward from there. Haley said, schedule a conference with teachers, provide student with tutoring schedule. I like that. Karen said, look at data, look at grades, meet with the teachers. Blair, I often look at what they feel their student is struggling with. Is it anxiety, grades, assessment, attendance? Look at their past history. Shell said, for a student struggling with anxiety, I usually start with a couple of one-on-one sessions, figure out where it's coming from, how severe it is, what it reaches. These are great. Talk to the teacher, meet with teachers. Yep, look at early warning systems. Convene a team meeting with all teachers because they could be having success in another class. Absolutely. As a student, my first go-to would be observation and data. Yep, absolutely. I like all the data talk. My initial response is to look at the data. If they've spoken with the teacher, maybe talk about a 504 versus IEP. Schedule a meeting with the parents and teachers to address the concern, review data, develop a plan of action, intervention, eval, etc. Review past grades, email teachers, get their input. Yeah, these are all things that I would have done too. Ask parents to tell me a little bit more about what the struggle, absolutely. Starting a little bit with, well, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing, what you feel like you're dealing with? Because what I hear as struggling could be completely different than what the parent thinks of as struggling. Thank you guys. I got so many more responses than I thought I would. Now I feel loved. So let's look. So basically, we do what you guys all just stated. We come up with a course of action. How are we going to move forward? And remember, this is a form of communication. So when we have parents that feel like they're not getting communication from their counselor or from the students' teachers, this is the course of action that we're taking. This is a form of communication with them. Even if we haven't even spoken to them yet, we're coming up with a plan. So when we come up with this course of action, it should be consistent, meaning that we want it to follow that MTSS structure. We're looking at the data, we're looking at the student's academic history, we're talking to the teachers, we're setting up a meeting if need be. We're talking to the parents about what they're seeing at home versus what our teachers are seeing at school. Is the PE teacher seeing the same thing as the chemistry teacher? Probably not. I know mine wouldn't have. Well, we look at what strategies work at home or in the classroom, and then it's really about creating that partnership between all the parties, and then celebrating when the progress is made. And then if there isn't progress, looking at, okay, what was different that with this that we could do with that. So what are we doing here that might look different with, what are we doing with X that might look different with Y? And that's all part of that problem solving team process, which is all part of MTSS. I see one more in the chat and I don't want to lose it. Also speak with the students. I had a student once where the parents wanted additional accommodations such as extra time. However, speaking the child didn't understand math. See, that's a perfect example. I never want us to go right to, okay, let's just do what the parent asks for. Let's take that step back. Let's do a little bit of digging. Let's talk to the child. Let's maybe do an observation. Talk to the teachers. We have to do that background work and do a lot of homework, which, yeah, takes up more time, but it's all those indirect services that are going to make a difference with our students. So how do MTSS and the ASCA national model align? So a lot of what I have researched and looked at, because a lot of the counselors in my district will say, we're not supposed to have anything to do with MTSS. And I'm like, you're actually considered, and this is from ASCA, one of the core team leaders for MTSS. Should you be running it by yourself? Absolutely not. Should you be making all the decisions as the team member? Absolutely not. It should all be a team decision, but that MTSS program can align perfectly with your comprehensive school counseling program. You're using that data analysis, you're developing your programs, and you're delivering those services directly with students through tier 1, 2, and 3. Those are all the same things that happen with MTSS. So I tell counselors, You're not working harder, you're working smarter. You're already doing all these things. Now you're just going to add additional verbiage onto it so that your admin's like, oh, you are using an MTSS model, because they might not hear comprehensive school counseling program and think what we think and understand what we know about how critical they are to student growth, student progression, student improvement. But when we put that MTSS spin on it, it gives them a whole nother view of it. The other thing to consider is our state actually requires schools to align their MTSS structures and procedures in their within their schools to their school improvement plans, their SIPs. So this is a huge way for schools to say, look, we have to tie MTSS to our SIP. Here's an area where school counselors shine, dealing with social skills with students, for example. This can really help students grow academically. Look at these areas on the SIP plan where we're seeing a lot of issues with students. Whether they heard it or not, most of them have at this point, that social emotional learning piece creates a huge, it has a huge effect on student academic achievement. And if that's what they're looking at, that's what we're going to show them. We're not, going over their reading skills with them, but we are teaching them how to use coping skills to deal with their anxiety in the classroom when they have a test coming up and they feel like they can't breathe when they look at the questions. That actually helps with the academics. So it all ties together and it benefits not only the student, but the school. I like the word harmonize. That's why I put it in here, because it is a harmonized approach. It's blending two different models together that essentially are doing the same thing, just with different verbiage. Really, the only difference between MTSS is it can target just academics or just SEL or just mental health or just behavior. Whereas with MTSS or with CSCPs and the ASCA national model, we can say that all four of those areas can be affected in a positive way through our comprehensive school counseling programs. I'm such a loser. I get so excited when I talk about that because I'm like, look, we figured out the solution. Let us just do what we were doing. It's MTSS, leave us alone. We knew what we were doing. So I actually pulled this direct quote from ASCA. It's their position statement related to MTSS. And like I said, I don't like reading directly from slides, but I think this one's so important that I'm going to read it to you. It's like, just pretend it's story time. School counselors are stakeholders in the development and implementation of MTSS. So remember how I said earlier that I've had counselors tell me, we're not supposed to have this big of a role in MTSS. Well, you actually are. You're one of the key stakeholders in not only implementing those MTSS structures, but developing them to begin with. So included, but not limited to RTI and responsive PBIS. So a lot of school counselors in our district are on their PBIS team because it also aligns with their comprehensive school counseling programs. It aligns with MTSS. So it makes sense to then work in harmony with your PBIS team too. The other part is just we get pulled in so many directions. We just get told, hey, you're a counselor. You want kids to be happy. Do you want to be on the PBIS team? And you go, okay, I don't know how to say no because I try to make people happy because I'm in the helping professions. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. School counselors align their work with MTSS through the implementation of a school counseling program designed to affect student development in the academic, career, and social emotional domains. So I really, really, really like this pyramid. My counterpart, Nikki, who serves our secondary counselors, she's like, this stresses me out. There's too much verbiage on it. So when we presented something similar to our counselors, she had taken everything off and then just explained it to them. But I want you guys to at least just have the picture so then you can take bits and pieces as you need them. So as you see, and as you already know, the tier 1 is those direct and indirect preventions for all students. This is that 80% of students that we're targeting through that classroom instruction for the most part. But then we're also doing those school-wide activities and the initiatives. That's where things like PBIS come in. Those are school-wide initiatives that we're doing. Student appraisal and advisement actually falls under that tier 1. And then those staff and family trainings and workshops, and then those partnerships with organizations among the community all falls under that tier 1 because we're looking at the larger group and what we can do for that 80%. Now, at that tier 2 level, we're looking at those direct and indirect services for some. So that 5 to 15% of students. This is where we're providing them with that individual or small group counseling, instruction, or appraisal and advisement. Now, a lot of this, I actually tell my counselors that I could also consider individual counseling a tier 3 because it's intense and it's with a much smaller group because it's one child, but it can also fall under that tier 2. It really depends on what you're working on. But from everything I've read, they consider individual and small group to be a tier 2, because then when you look at the tier 3, it's the indirect services where you're referring students out for services and you're consulting and collaborating with other organizations and getting students that support they need. For example, in our district, we have what's called a mental health collaborative referral form. So if a student is not being, if their needs cannot be met any longer through the school district's mental health supports, school counselor, school social worker, school-based mental health counselor, or school psych, those are who we consider our school-based mental health team. We then refer the student using that mental health collaborative referral form to an outside agency. We work with 8 agencies that we have contracts with, and we pay for those services for students to get counseling if they don't have insurance or Medicaid to pay for it. Now, the interesting part of, interesting is the wrong word, funny is the wrong word. The cool part of it is we rewrote the form this last year to have counselors fill out what tier 1 or what tier 2 and 3 interventions have already been attempted with this student. And the counselors have to write what they've tried. You know, student was already in group counseling. It wasn't really helping. We weren't seeing any improvements. And then they fax this form to our mental health coordinator, Dr. Gillard, and then she then determines from their insurance or Medicaid what agency to send their referral to get services. The unfortunate thing is only 20% of those referrals actually lead to counseling that occurs for a variety of reasons. But we constantly remind our counselors about that because all of the interventions are really taking place on campus. So if we can, we really need to target those interventions on campus with our students, working with them ourselves from that mental health background. A lot of the problems that we're seeing is that counselors feel like they can't fit in the time, or they don't have that rapport with the student built. So it's going to take a lot more than just 6 to 8 solution focused sessions to get that done. That's why we encourage them to meet with their team and say, who's the best person to meet with this student based on their expertise, their experience, their rapport with the student, if any, etc. Sometimes we'll even talk to a teacher and say, you know the student better than we do. What kind of avenue or outlook should we take moving in with the student to get them comfortable? And then of course we get consent signed, and then we move forward from there. So I want to go through a few scenarios with you that are related to MTSS and school counselors' role. So you're receiving a lot of, more than usual, we always get a lot of them, but it's just an unusually large number of referrals from your teachers and your parents and students regarding social and emotional issues that are related to anxiety. The level of anxiety, especially in our county among students, has skyrocketed within the last few years. We think a lot of it came from COVID, but then we think some of it isn't related to COVID. So addressing these concerns on an individual basis is not realistic because of your schedule. So in this case, would classroom instruction be beneficial? Absolutely. This is a perfect time to use Tier 1 classroom guidance and instruction. It's one of the most effective ways to address students' needs because you can hit a large number, hit's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. You can address the issues with a large number of students in order to improve those social, emotional, and mental health outcomes. So rather than looking at a list of 11 referrals that you've gotten of students that are struggling and need support, and maybe you think, okay, I could do a small group with them. Well, more than likely, it's not just those 11 or 12 students. It's probably a much larger number. Those are just the only students that have, or parents or teachers that have come to you about these students already. So let's address this through classroom guidance. We're casting that wider net on all students. And like this last line says, those are just some of the basic principles of MTSS. Well, it's also one of the basic principles within comprehensive school counseling programs in our national model. We're going to look at what are students struggling with, what can we do so that things don't get worse. During your classroom lesson on helping students understand their rights in sexual harassment, Alexandria's nonverbal cues catch your attention. You find yourself discreetly watching her face and body language throughout the class while you're presenting. Later on, you ask the teacher about her, and she says, now that you mention it, she's been more absent lately and more passive. So what are we doing in this situation? Classroom guidance is so important and so crucial because it's not only a time that we, get to spend with our students, but it's also time to look at students for signs of stress or anything else. Is a student sleeping more? Does the student come in and their hair is completely rattled? Do they smell? These are things we might not see on a day-to-day basis because we're running in 500 different directions. But when you're in that classroom, you get a much closer gauge to what those students are doing, looking at their body language, looking at those nonverbals and recognizing those emotions that are within them. But those are also strengths of counselors in general. Not saying they're not of teachers, because they absolutely are. But when the teacher is seeing a student every day, they might not notice some of those behaviors because it's subtle or it's happening slowly over time. Whereas a counselor may see a student one day and then not see them for 2 weeks, and there's just been a drastic change. You're going to notice that. So problem-solving team meetings. Now, I had said earlier, these are also referred to as student support meetings, SSTs. There's tons of different verbiage for them. But like I said, in our county, we call them PSTs. So this, I pulled a document from my files and put it on this slide. But before our teachers can request a PST meeting, they have this checklist that they can use that they don't turn this into the counselor. They just use this so that they can say, I've already done these things. Now we still need to have a PST because I'm not seeing any changes. I created this form last year because our counselors were inundated with PST requests, and like some of them coming to me in tears because they were completely overwhelmed. One of my counselors had 30 PST requests by like September 2nd. So we said, we have to do something about this. Let's help the teachers understand what a PST is actually for. It's not just for evaluation. It's literally to problem solve. It's in the name. Sorry. So we created this form. I created this form actually with I don't know what kind of group to call it. It was an MTSS core team at an elementary school. We had 2 teachers, an interventionist, a literacy coach, an assistant principal, a principal, school psychologist, school counselor, and we all met and said, what do we need to have on this form so that everyone understands what needs to be done in the first place before we bring this to the counselor? These were the things that we came up with, which I'm not going to read them to you word by word, but the big ones are, we have a tier 1 checklist that the teachers also have to show that they've already attempted these things on the tier 1 checklist. I think I included it on one of these slides, and they have to staple that to their PST forms when they're turning that in. Yep, I was right. So like I said, I copy and pasted this from my forms as well. So this is the tier 1 strategies checklist. They have to check off what they've already implemented in their classroom and what date they were doing it. It could be from this date to this date, or I started this on this date and I'm currently doing it. This has made a huge difference in the number of PSTs that we received. A lot of it was just helping teachers understand classroom management, making sure they're communicating with the teachers, looking at what students need versus what they want. I think it's made a big help. I know with our one school, she went from last year, she received 30 by September 1, where it's August 25th, she said she's received 3. So I said, oh, we made a big, I think that's a good chunk of progress. So aligning MTSS with school counseling. I talked about this a little bit earlier with regard to the ASCA national model, but let's get a little more deeper of a dive into it. So like I had said earlier, it's all data driven and decision making driven. We're problem solving. These are decisions that we're making based on our data. So all students begin in that tier 1. And we're looking at this right now just from a school counseling lens, not from necessarily an academic lens. For students struggling in reading, their phonemic awareness, something like that. We're just looking at it now from that social, emotional, mental health, behavioral model. Absolutely, I will share the forms with you guys. I would love to. So we're going to collect from all of our students some baseline data. This could be screening scales, surveys, and I'll talk about universal screeners a little bit as well. We use universal screeners, and then we'll group students into tiers based on those indicated levels of risk. We might not do it right away, but we at least start with those classroom guidance tier 1 interventions based on what the data tells us from these universal screeners. The reason we don't want to put students in right away is we normally do that first universal screener at the beginning of the year in August or September, and then we do the next one at the end of the year. So we want to look at how the student progressed. So we try and give the student a little bit of time to get acclimated to the new school year. And then after they've gotten a little bit more comfortable with what's going on, we can really get a better judge of how they're feeling and what's going on with them. So that time in early September, mid-September-ish, just seems to have worked out better to get a better grasp and grip on what's going on with the student internally. So I'm not going to read these verbatim, but school counselors are collaborating, they're coordinating, they're using those leadership skills to meet the needs of these students because they want to identify which students are at risk. We don't want to be putting out fires 24/7. We want to be looking at how we can be proactive. One of us had said earlier, talking about the early warning systems, I kind of see the universal screeners in a way as early warning systems. Who should we keep an eye out on? Who do we need to talk to maybe the parent, the teacher, have a PST meeting, do some observations and see, okay, this is how this student can get additional supports. Maybe we'll put them in a tier 2 social skills. I keep going back to social skills because I always used to run a lot of social skills groups. So that's not the only group I recommend. It's just the one that keeps coming to my mind. And then how do we collect the data to determine the effectiveness of these supports? Not only would we do that universal screener at the end of the year, but you can use any kind of reliable or valid survey related to what kind of intervention you're using to gauge where your student is. So with the members of your team, you're going to look at this cyclical database problem solving because that's the only way you can really make informed decisions. If you're only using observations and discussions with the teacher and the parent, you're not getting what's the word I'm looking for? You're not getting every piece of the puzzle. What is the data telling us? If we feel like we don't have enough data, what else can we add? We've already looked at a survey, we have a universal screener. What else is there out there? You could even make something based on an intervention, an evidence-based intervention you're using, or pull from other reliable and valid interventions and see, how do I pull all of this together to meet my students' needs? I'm very anti-puzzle piece, cookie cutter, I'm very anti-cookie cutter. I think if you have permission from creators and you can pull from various interventions to do what works for you, by all means, the more the merrier. So I found this and I really like it because I think it kind of gives you a really good visual of what the MTSS cycle would look like for a behavioral intervention. So you're starting with developing that MTSS team. Really, this team should just be known at the beginning of each year. Who's going to be on a team regardless? Normally, it's going to be that school counselor, an admin, at least 2 of the teachers for the student, your school psych. This had data specialists, but I think the term data specialist changes based on your district. In ours, it wouldn't be a data specialist that would be doing this. That's our person that inputs schedules, does attendance and all that kind of stuff. The data specialist would really be that person that's looking at your data and bringing it to the table to disseminate it with the group, kind of explain it with that school psychologist and school counselor. I'm not going to go through every single one of these boxes because I know most of you already know about this, but I liked having this here as an example if you ever feel like you need a really good visual to present to your team. Having that plan of action, like we had talked about earlier, that course of action helps you to determine, okay, who's going to do what tools are we going to use, and how are we going to let the faculty know what's going on with our tier 1. We're administering those universal screeners, and then we're looking at our data to determine what students are going to go in what tier before we deliver those services, and then progress monitor. You'll see here we have progress monitor and follow-up action, but then evaluate effectiveness and plan for the future. These are exactly the things that we do with comprehensive school counseling programs. We evaluate our programs to see what do we need to do differently and what worked well. So, like I said, I don't like reading directly from slides, but I thought these were so important to include that I wanted to read them a little more verbatim than most of my slides. When interventions are conducted with fidelity, the MTSS structures and framework can really provide school counselors with multiple opportunities to have lasting impacts on their students' success, not only academically, but behaviorally, social, emotionally, mentally, because you can integrate all of that into the framework of your school counseling program. This MTSS application, when aligned with the role of school counselors at any grade level, can be used across any kind of domain with the student. So, roles and responsibilities. I actually wrote most of our MTSS manual for our school district, and some of this I pulled from there with tweaks because I wanted you guys to see how it's done in our county and how I really tried to advocate for our school counselors to not be the MTSS coordinators for their schools and push this to be a team effort, not a school counselors in charge effort. So we created core team, tier 1, behavior teams are tier 2 or academic, and then those individual problem solving teams could be for tier 3, and they could be behavior or academic. And now when I say behavior, that all includes mental health, social emotional learning, discipline, and behavioral issues in that sense, and mental health. So we look at what this group does, how often do they meet, and who should be included. And you'll see in this, school counselors are included in all of them. And then we have also may include, depending on what exactly the circumstances are. We even include our district MTSS specialists if we can, because being able to make sure that every school is running their meetings in a uniform fashion is very important. I always tell our schools, as long as your processes and procedures are the same, how you run them is up to you, because every school is different and you have to run them in a way that benefits your students. Students at a non-Title I school probably don't need those same supports as students at a Title I school, as an example. So when it comes to school counselors and their role with MTSS, they are working in collaboration with so many other parties to support these procedures and these processes that come with MTSS and these universal screeners for not only academics, but for mental health and behavior. I think we're so stuck, especially in this state, on testing, that when students get another test, even if it's something that's not graded, they just kind of feel burnt out. It's another reason why we wait until September to give it to them, because we don't want to start their year off with, take this test right now. It's not a test, but it looks like a test, so you're just going to consider it a test. Another big one is providing those indirect services. I think we forget that a lot of what we do that does benefit students directly is what we do indirectly. And it's because we spend so much time doing paperwork and not with our kids that we're like, this is a waste of my time. All I'm doing is paperwork. Well, think of it like this. All of that work that you're doing in the background is benefiting your students directly when you're presenting that data that you had to collect and go through and do your research on, or when you're serving as a member of that meeting that the student's not even in. It's all making a difference with those students in a direct sense. And I pulled this from Goodman and Scott from a 2020 article. They engage as part of the leadership team in MTSS, school counselors, but they should not be the sole leader of MTSS in our buildings. I pulled this and showed it to our higher ups in our district so that they can understand, you know, our counselors aren't just saying this to say it. There is actual research that supports this. I always tell the counselors, everything you do it with data. Even if you want to complain to your admin, complain with data. So, like I said, I'm going to keep stressing this. MTSS is not a single job for a single person. In our district, there's also the push that the school psychologist should be assisting in determining eligibility for students and what intervention to put them in. And we've had to tell them, we need to take a step back and remember, everyone puts their area of expertise onto the table to create a team-informed decision. Everyone is planning and acting and evaluating those services and the interventions that are utilized to determine which one will be best for this student or that student or for the group. Each member of the team provides a unique role, from the direct service that's being provided through classroom guidance to who's managing your data, like the data specialists I brought up earlier, who's looking at the data and providing it to the team. I really like this line. School counselors should be aware of their plentiful duties and only take the lead on program components within MTSS that are suitable and directly relate to the role of school counselors. So it's plenty fine to take on additional duties that are related to your role. How do these duties that I'm incorporating into my daily life as a counselor affecting my comprehensive school counseling program? Are they strengthening my program, or are they weakening my program because it's taking me away from what I'm supposed to be doing? Things to think about. Steps for MTSS. Now, I'm not going to go through this entirely. You'll have the PowerPoint, but I wanted to include it because I felt like kind of getting an overview of the structures of MTSS was important. Looking at who your team is, what your universal supports are, what your demographic data is, what instruments you can use for universal screenings. A timeline for key events is so important. We include that in our manual. I'm pretty sure I included it in this as well. So let me see if here it is. So before I go to the universal screeners, we have something similar to this included in our MTSS manual, and it just helps schools to get an overview of what they should be doing at what time of year. So a lot of the paperwork-based information and work is left on our interventionists to do. I've really tried to take a lot of that paperwork off the school counselors. But you'll see here, it shows the teams are reviewing data and reports and response meetings at least at the end of each quarter. The universal screeners are conducted, we say at least twice a year, but if you can do them fall, winter, and spring, that's even better. But really at a minimum, we're asking at least fall and spring. Prior to a semester change, teams have to meet and determine if any interventions would change for second semester, because then schedules will be changing. And then you'll see here, these are the things that apply to both elementary and secondary. So I won't go through all of these with you, but this actually helped alleviate a lot of the anxieties for our MTSS core teams in our schools, because they were able to get a visual on what do I need to do during what months. And then they can put them on their calendar at the beginning of the school year. So these things are already blocked off for them. Oh, you know what? I remember now, I skipped. So a little bit about the universal screeners. They're absolutely crucial to the MTSS process. While school counselors do rely on referrals a lot from teachers and parents and students to determine what intervention students need, those universal screeners can save you a ton of time, and you can come at it from a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach. The other thing is, universal screeners are viewed as a tier 2 to then determine what universal screeners are used as a tier 1 to then determine what tier 2 and tier 3 interventions are needed, but also your tier 1 interventions. We go back to earlier when I talked about all those referrals for anxiety. We're just going to create that into a tier 1 intervention because it's targeting a lot more of our students than we're used to. So this is something else that is similar to what we have in our MTSS manual for our school district. It gives you an overview of what each team's responsibilities are. Obviously, the core team has a lot more than the others because the behavior and academic and individual teams are really targeting specific areas of need, whereas the core team is kind of looking at all data, all areas as a whole, and determining what they're going to do within each of these smaller teams. So in our district, this is how our MTSS teams are disseminated, and I made it into a flow chart. It's similar to what you saw a few slides back, but I thought this was a good way to a good visual. I love me a good flow chart. I'm a very visual learner. So you'll see here, the core MTSS team is always going to be the biggest, and then as you have more intensive and individualized needs, the group kind of gets smaller to those members that really know the student or really know the issue at hand and are experts in certain areas. So what exactly are the roles and responsibilities for a school counselor? I did a presentation similar to this with our school counselors in our district so that they would understand what their role was in our district related to MTSS. So you'll see here we have facilitate and or participate in the core team meetings, and in tier 2. For tier 3, we have facilitate / coordinate. When we get to that PST portion is when students, the school counselor is in charge of coordinating and kind of running that meeting. They're not expected to make the decisions for that meeting. That's a team effort, but they're coordinating, with the parent, talking about what's going to happen and when, or with their guidance clerk to schedule the meeting. But you'll see we look at providing those tier 1 classroom guidance lessons, and we use Safer Smarter Kids and signs of suicide. So those are just 2 that we provided examples of. They participate in PST meetings when necessary. They don't need to attend every one of them. If they can just provide their input to the team that's meeting because they can't attend, that's good enough. They shouldn't have to cancel a meeting because the school counselor has something else going on. And you'll also see providing that group counseling, assisting and accessing those specialized supports and assistance. That's a huge part of our job, is collaborating with those community stakeholders, providing those wraparound services to our students. And then I didn't include individual counseling here. I don't know why, but like I said, that can really fall under that tier 2 or that tier 3. And then referring out would go under that tier 3 as well. So like I said, I'm not going to read through this again because I just went over this a little bit, but this kind of gives you that solid breakdown of what those tiered interventions look like specifically for school counselors. Again, I'm not going to go through these in detail because we just did, but check in and check out. A lot of school counselors think it's a tier 3, but it can also be used as a tier 2 because a lot more students than just one use tier check in, check out. So we consider it a tier 2. Same thing here. I have 1 minute left, so I'm trying to make sure I target all of the big pieces that I want to. I haven't really talked a lot about progress monitoring, and that's only because we do that through our comprehensive school counseling programs. It really looks the same with MTSS. You might just be using different kinds of progress monitoring programs or tools in order to test those students along the way. Our MTSS framework for mental health is set up like this in our school district. So have they received those tier 2 and 3 interventions from a school-based person? Yes. Are they effective? No. Then we refer to that mental health collaborative like I had brought up earlier. I'm not going to go through this. You can, but this shows you in our district who's considered a tier 1 intervention, tier 2, and a tier 3. And then to end, I included a lot of the things that ASCA aligns their philosophies, their statements, their views with MTSS. These all align, they all harmonize with MTSS and ASCA's national model. So I thought that was good to include. And to end this, school counselors, they're leaders, they facilitate their programs, and they show how their programs are relevant to school success. They implement their programs to address the needs of all their students, and they work with educators to remove those barriers for students. I'm obviously not going to read this, but I pulled this right from ASCA. This is their full position statement for MTSS. And you can see the things I bolded. They're the things that I kept saying the same words of. Just some helpful resources. Like I said, you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint. And then references. Now, are there any questions? I included a picture of my dogs because I think it's hysterical.
So thank you, Dr. Neidl, for this very, very informative presentations. Very, very much appreciated. It is 7:31, and we do like to be, well, 7:31 Central Time, 8:31 Eastern Time. So we do try to be, mindful of everyone's time. Certainly, if anyone has any questions and wants to stay on, and that's fine. But otherwise, we appreciate everyone's participation and joining us this evening. And I hope you all found this to be as informative and interesting as I did. So I do see a lot of enjoying the presentations and so on and so forth. So I'll stop talking in case anyone has a question, but if not, then we will say thank you again to Dr. Neidl and wish everyone a very good evening. And yes, thank you, Dr. Schumacher. On behalf of ASCA, we do thank everyone for joining us this evening.
Thank you all so much for attending.
There was a question, and I'm not sure if that's going to be a quick answer, Dr. Neidl, or if maybe she needs to reach out to you directly.
So, yes.
How does MTSS?
If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to discuss that with you. So I think I'd go off on a tangent. I don't want to hold you up, but Dr. Upton, if you send me an email, I can send you some resources to find good universal screeners that are evidence-based. My email is right in the PowerPoint slide.
And I'm putting it into the chat right now, just in case. Anyone...
Thank you, Holly.
Sure.
I don't know why I didn't think to do that.
Well, that's okay. Well, no, just in case, just in case.
I'm glad you all enjoyed.
Please remember the PowerPoint and the recording of tonight's webinar will be posted on the Florida School Counselor Association website. Will be available this weekend.
Thank you, Jeannie. That public service announcement was by Jeannie Maddox. And Jeannie, are we still recording?
Yes, we are. I didn't know if people wanted to stay around and ask questions and if Dr. Neidl was willing to stay. Otherwise, we can end our session for this evening.
Okay, well, I'll ask one more time if there's anyone still on. We have 14 participants that are still hanging on, actually down to 12, if anyone has a question. I think we are good then.
These comments in the chat are making me feel so special.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so loved. Thank you, everyone.
If there are no more questions in the chat and no one wants to ask one, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Lillian.
Jeannie. Thank you, Holly.